Hi all. So today we're going to be talking about community psychology research methods. And we'll be primarily talking about qualitative and quantitative methods. So the most important rule of research is that research questions should always guide the selection of your research. So your methods are completely dependent on the question that you're trying to answer, right? So this goes for other things other than research methods, but particularly with community psychology, it's necessary to understand which research methods fit best with your research question, and which research methods are better apt to answer the questions that you're trying to answer. And there's really two main camps of research methods. There's sort of your qualitative methods and your quantitative methods. So first we're going to discuss qualitative methods. Qualitative methods are defined by being textual for the most part. They could also be visual. That sort of gets a little bit out of community psychology, but in other fields they can be visual. They can be artifacts. But for the most part, within community psychology, your qualitative methods are going to be based on text. So those could be texts that you extract from the community. They can be text that you do yourself, that you take yourself. And these texts are descriptive, right? So you're describing a particular context. You're describing a particular phenomena. And you want that description to be as rich as possible. So qualitative methods really attend to unheard voices. They're really trying to get at the underlying understanding of a context, right? And so by using qualitative methods, you're really trying to understand a particular phenomena in a very deep sort of way, and you're trying to understand something in a very deep way, right? So again, all of these common features here come into play. Understanding context, using deep interpretation, listening, purposeful sampling, so on and so forth, right? These all have to do with understanding a particular context or a particular phenomenon in a deep sort of way, using methods that are textual. So, Eric Mankowski and one of his colleagues, I'm forgetting her name, did this. It's not a study. It's a theoretical piece outlining the various acts of qualitative research. And Act 1 is the act of asking, right? And so within this act, what you're essentially doing as a researcher is you're trying to identify the persons and the contexts in which you are going to work. So you're really defining what your research question is, who's going to assist you in answering that question, what context is best in answering that question, so which community, and you're also identifying which assumptions and values that you're bringing to the table when you are conducting your research, right? So when we look back at a couple chapters ago where we were talking about researcher assumptions, right? Or actually last chapter, chapter 3, when we were talking about the various types of research philosophies, you're really checking your assumptions and values here in the first part of asking. Then there's witnessing. So this is when you actually conduct your research. This is when you collect your data, right? So one thing about qualitative and quantitative research is you have data. Within qualitative data, as I said before, your data is generally text, something of a textual base. So what you're doing here is you're really extracting your data from your particular context, and there's various ways to do that, and we'll get into that in a minute. Step 3 is interpretation. So in interpretation, what you're doing is you're taking your data and you're making sense of it, right? You're figuring out what are the underlying phenomena going on, what are the patterns that are occurring, what's happening with your data, what's happening in the context based on what your data say. And then finally is knowing. So it's utilizing your data to basically create social change within a community, right? So so bringing your data, bringing your information back to the community to assist them in further understanding what's going on, right? So there are various types of qualitative methods, and qualitative methods, there are tons of them. I mean, there are literally books and books and books written on this stuff, so this is just a very brief introduction to the various types of qualitative methods that community psychologists generally use. Participant observation. This is something that you would see definitely in community research, but you would also see in sort of anthropological studies, right? When somebody goes out to, say, a Native American tribe and lives as that tribe does, right? They're participating in that, and at the same time, they're observing what's going on in that context. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. A colleague of mine at Michigan State, Robin Miller, and her graduate students, they conducted a study on what was called this empowerment project. And what empowerment was, it was a awareness-raising campaign in the city of Detroit to raise awareness among men who had sex with men. And how they did that is they went out to generally gay bars, and they would distribute condoms, they would distribute information about HIV/AIDS and the prevalence of HIV/AIDS in those communities. And so what Robin Miller and her team did is they would actually go out into the bars and they would sit and observe what was going on. So they would sort of sometimes sit in the back corner. They would participate. They would go up and ask questions. They would ask various people questions. They would just sort of chat with people. And so that's participant observation, right? They're immersed in that sort of context. Qualitative interviews, on the other hand, are, you're not participating in necessarily any particular context, but what you're doing is you're interviewing people as a journalist would interview a celebrity, right? So you're interviewing people to understand their lived experience of a particular context. And so that's what qualitative interviewing is. And that is similar to focus groups. However, qualitative interviews are a one-on-one interview. It's researcher and participant. Focus groups, on the other hand, are groups of people, right? So you're actually doing an interview with a group. And the nice thing about focus groups, so there's pluses and benefits for each of these, pluses and minuses. Focus groups, they can help reveal patterns of interaction that you wouldn't be able to see in a qualitative interview or one-on-one interview. However, the downside is there can be some social normative behavior that is not elicited with a focus group that may be elicited in a qualitative interview. So what I mean by that is somebody might be afraid to say something in a focus group that they would not be afraid to say in a qualitative interview because the interview is anonymous. And then finally, case studies. Case studies sort of incorporate all of these, right? And so case studies get extremely immersed into one individual or one setting or one context, and they can involve all of the methods above, including archival data. So archival data is existing data, such as information in a library, right? So those are the archives. That's what archival data means. So it's the current data that a community has. So there are various strengths and limitations with this, right? Some of the strengths of qualitative methods is that you can really go in depth about a particular phenomenon. You can really get into relationship building with your community, with the people that you're working with, because you're really trying to understand that particular context or phenomena at a very deep level. So that's a huge strength for qualitative data. Consequently, there are limitations. It makes it difficult to generalize particular phenomenon to larger context or to another context. So what generalization means is that the thing that occurs in this context or in this community also occurs in a different community, right? So what makes Seattle, for example, doesn't necessarily make Detroit, right? So those are two different contexts, and the phenomenon that occurs in Seattle may not generalize to Detroit, okay? So it can make it difficult to generalize. The insider-outsider dilemma, I'll just speak on that for a second. That is basically, if you've heard the term going native, that can be one of those issues where the insider sort of becomes co-opted, the outsider becomes co-opted by the insider. Additionally, it also happens when there's a power differential between insiders, or people in the context, and outsiders, generally the researcher, right? So it can create issues with power dynamics there as well. So now let's discuss quantitative methods. So quantitative methods are significantly different than qualitative methods. However, they are not opposed to one another. They actually can help one another and facilitate one another. Whereas qualitative methods are more about understanding context, using text. Quantitative methods, so quantities, right, that's a way to think about this, are useful for understanding generalization, understanding general trends about a population or about a sample. And so it's really about understanding measurement in terms of statistical data, right? Numerical data, specifically. It's also used for modeling multi-level influences. So what that means is understanding how higher levels of analysis, such as a locality, for example, can influence individual behavior. So there are several types of quantitative methods. Quantitative description is a little bit like qualitative, in that you're trying to understand a particular phenomenon of a certain context, right? So you're not trying to necessarily generalize what's happening in that particular context. And quantitative researchers do this by conducting community surveys, right? So they'll go around, have somebody fill out a survey in a particular neighborhood. They'll use something like geographic information systems, which is understanding how the geographic layout and various physical and spatial aspects influence individuals and individual behavior, individual well-being. These are non-experimental, meaning people aren't sort of put into random groups versus a control group, right? So you're understanding the entire population of a particular context. The ESID model, on the other hand, I'll just leave that. The ESID model, the Experimental Social Innovation and Dissemination, we discussed this a little bit before. This is experimentation, right? So this has to do with experimenting in a particular context. And what experimenting means in a research aspect, it means that people are randomly assigned to groups, and they're trying to identify if particular aspects of an intervention is effective, right? So you'll randomly assign, say, people into two different groups. One group gets an intervention, and the other group gets treatment as usual. And what you're asking here is the intervention effective? Is it more effective than treatment as usual, right? So you'll hear the term placebo or control group. That control group is treatment as usual in a community setting, right? And you all read about the fair weather lodges, right? So that was an experimental study, and they're really able to find exactly what is occurring in the community, what particular variable is the thing that's causing various outcomes, right? And so this is nice because you can really hone in on what's working in a community. The difficulty here is that communities often don't want to do this, right? I'm sure you can imagine if you're working with a homeless shelter, for example, and you tell the homeless shelter, okay, we'll give $50 a week to a random number of people and sort of see what happens under the assumption that they'll do something good with it. and the other 50 people, or the other half of people, we don't do that to. I can imagine that homeless shelter going, well, that's not fair, right? You're not giving a fair amount of money to two different groups of people, and we need to make it fair. And that's usually the big issue with experimentation in a community setting. These other ones, random field experiments, I'm not going to go over in this lecture. Just read up on those. But there are sort of different ways to think about experimentation and experimental designs. This should say quantitative, not qualitative, so remove that. Okay, quantitative, strengths and limitations. So the biggest strength is generalization, right? So you can generalize what's going on in this context to other contexts. And the nice thing about that is if you're conducting research and you find some innovation that's really effective in one community, you can try to do that in another community, and hopefully it will work, right? So we can generalize various innovations to different communities. The limitation here is there's less context that goes into this. It's more difficult to understand sort of the subtle phenomena that are going on in a community with quantitative methods. In sort of top-down, bottom-up terms, quantitative methods are more top-down, right? They're coming from the researcher. We've identified what is going on in a community, and we're measuring those issues, those phenomena. It's more difficult to identify particular phenomena, and it's top-down in the sense that quantitative researchers sort of have an idea of what's going on in a community, and we're measuring that, whereas qualitative is really trying to understand from the beginning what's going on in a community. And this is where quantitative and qualitative methods can work together. Qualitative methods can really hone in and understand what's going on in a particular context, and then quantitative methods can measure that at a larger level, can measure those phenomena at a larger level. And that's really how they can cohere together very nicely. And then you have mixed methods research, right? So this is the place where you use both quantitative and qualitative methods, and they work very well together, right? So you can use quantitative methods for looking at associations between various variables or various phenomena. You can use it for generalizability. However, with qualitative, it can really help to understand the context at a much deeper level. And using qualitative and quantitative together helps with triangulation. And what that means is gathering data from different methods to identify if what's occurring from either of those is true, right, or is supported. So if there's no conflict between your results of two different methods. So to conclude, both methods are really tap different sources of knowledge, and they can really complement each other, right? So it can be beneficial to use a mixed methods design. However, when you're using mixed methods design, right, all of this, when you're utilizing various methods, the basic underlying issue is, do you have the time and resources to use those methods? And additionally, does the community have the patience to use multiple methods? Because at the end of the day, the more methods that you use, the more time and the more resources it's going to take out of you, and it's going to take out of the community. So that's the issue with using both of those.